Have you ever caught yourself saying something to yourself that you would never say to someone you love? Every single day your mind is having a conversation. The question is, who's leading it? A frightened child or a wise old master? By the end of this, you will know exactly how to change that voice. And once you do, your entire life begins to shift with it. 1. The voice you never question. Sit still for a moment, close your eyes if you wish, and listen, not to the sounds around you, but to the sound inside you. There is a voice in there. It never stops. It comments on everything you do. It judges your mistakes before you've even finished making them. It tells you what you are and what you are not. And here is the strange part. You have never once asked it who gave it the right to speak. We spend our whole lives listening to this voice as though it were the truth, as though it were us. But tell me, if a stranger followed you all day, whispering insults, doubting your worth, reminding you of every failure, would you keep that person in your life? Would you invite them to walk beside you year after year, shaping how you see yourself? Of course not. And yet, that is exactly what many of us do, except the stranger is not outside us. It lives inside the mind, and because it speaks in our own voice, we mistake it for wisdom. I want you to understand something important today. The voice in your head is not the truth. It is a habit. It was built sentence by sentence over years, through every criticism you absorbed, every comparison you made, every moment someone told you that you were not enough. And a habit, no matter how old, can be unlearned. Now, this is not a small thing. This is perhaps the most important discovery a human being can make, that the way you speak to yourself is not fixed. It is not written into your nature like the color of your eyes. It was trained into you. And what was trained can be retrained. Think about how you spoke to yourself the last time you made a mistake. Did you say, "This happens, I will learn and continue"? Or did you say, "Why do I always ruin everything"? Most people, if they are honest, will admit the second voice is the louder one. And here lies the quiet tragedy of most lives. Not that people fail, but that they punish themselves for failing, over and over, using words they would never dare use on a friend. I have met people who have achieved great things in the outer world. Success, recognition, comfort. And yet inside, they are still speaking to themselves like a frightened child being scolded. Success does not silence this voice. Only awareness does. And awareness begins with a single, simple act. Noticing, not fixing, not fighting, just noticing. The next time that voice rises, when you fail at something, when you feel small, when you compare yourself to another, pause. Ask yourself one question. Would I say this to someone I love? That single question is a doorway. Walk through it enough times and the voice begins to change shape. It becomes quieter. It becomes kinder. Not because you forced it to be, but because you finally saw it clearly enough to choose something else. But to truly change this voice, you must go further than noticing it in the present moment. You must understand where it came from in the first place. Because a voice this powerful, this constant, this convincing, did not simply appear on its own. 2. Where your inner critic was born. No child is born criticizing themselves. Watch a young child learning to walk, they fall again and again, and they do not stop to say, "I am a failure, I cannot do this." They simply stand and try again. There is no shame in them yet. There is no voice telling them they are not enough. That voice arrives later, and it arrives through us, through the people around us, through the world that raises us. Somewhere along the way, a child hears, "You should have done better." Somewhere along the way, a young person is compared to a sibling, a classmate, a stranger's success on a screen. Somewhere, mistakes stop being lessons and start being evidence. Evidence used against them. Evidence that becomes the foundation of the voice that will follow them for the rest of their life. This is not about blaming your parents, your teachers, or your past. That is not the purpose of understanding your roots. The purpose is far more useful than blame. It is freedom. Because once you see clearly where a belief came from, you can finally ask the most liberating question of all. Is this belief actually mine? Or did I simply inherit it the way I inherited a language without ever choosing it? Most of what your inner critic says was never yours to begin with. It is borrowed language, spoken first by a tired parent, an anxious teacher, a competitive world that measured your worth by your output. You absorbed it the way a child absorbs everything, without question, without defense, because a child does not yet have the tools to filter what is true from what is simply loud. But you are not a child anymore. You now have the ability, something a child does not, the ability to examine a thought and decide whether to keep it. This is one of the quiet powers of being an adult, and very few people ever use it. They carry the voice of a critical teacher from 30 years ago as though it were still standing in the room, still writing their worth in red ink. I ask you to try something. Think of the harshest thing your inner voice tells you. Now ask, whose voice does this sound like? Not literally perhaps, but in tone. Is it patient, or is it impatient, the way someone impatient with you once was? Is it warm, or is it cold, clinical, dismissive, like someone who never truly saw you, only your results? When you trace the voice back to its root, something remarkable happens. It loses its authority. It stops feeling like truth and starts looking like an old recording playing on repeat long after the original speaker has left the room. And a recording, no matter how many times it has played, can always be replaced with something new. This is not easy work. I will not pretend otherwise. Unlearning is often harder than learning because you are not adding something new to an empty space. You are gently removing something that has lived inside you for years, sometimes decades. But it can be done. It is being done right now by people all over the world who finally decided to stop mistaking an old wound for a permanent truth. And here is where the real transformation begins. Not in understanding the noise, but in discovering what exists underneath it, in the space where the noise has not yet arrived. 3. The silence before the words. Beneath every thought you have ever had, there is something quieter, something that was there before the inner critic was born, and will remain long after you have learned to soften its voice. This is the silence beneath the noise, the awareness that notices the thoughts but is not made of the thoughts itself. Let me explain this simply. When you think, I am not good enough, who is it that hears this thought? Who is it that notices it and can even choose to question it? That noticing, that quiet witness, is not the same as the thought. The thought comes and goes. The one who notices remains steady in the background, watching everything pass like clouds across a still sky. Most people never meet this part of themselves. They are so consumed by the noise of their thoughts that they mistake the noise for their entire identity. They believe, I am my thoughts, I am my fears, I am the voice that criticizes me. But you are not the storm. You are the sky in which the storm passes through. And a sky, no matter how dark the clouds, is never actually damaged by them. This is not a mystical idea, though it may sound like one. It is something you can test for yourself in complete silence, without any special training. Sit quietly. Let your thoughts arrive one after another. Do not push them away. Simply watch them, the way you would watch traffic pass on a distant road. Notice how each thought eventually fades, replaced by another. And notice, too, that something in you remains constant through all of it, unmoved, unchanged, simply present. This quiet presence is where your real power lives. It is not loud, it does not shout for attention the way your inner critic does, but it is far older, far steadier, and far more trustworthy. When you learn to return to this quiet space, even for a few breaths a day, not because you defeated it in an argument, but because you finally have somewhere else to stand. There is a kind of freedom in this that is difficult to describe until you feel it. Once you know, truly know, that you are not your thoughts, that you are the awareness holding them, the sharpest words your inner critic can offer begin to feel like weather passing over a mountain. The mountain does not argue with the storm, it simply remains what it has always been, letting the storm move through without taking it personally. This silence is not something you must build from nothing. It is not far away, hidden behind years of practice you have not yet completed. It is already here, beneath every thought you have had today, waiting quietly for you to notice it. The noticing itself is the practice. There is no complicated method required, only the willingness to pause, breathe, and listen beneath the noise rather than only within it. And once you have touched that silence, even briefly, you begin to understand something that changes everything that follows. The voice was never as powerful as you believed. It only seemed that way because you had never met the one who was listening to it all along. 4. Speaking to yourself like a master. Imagine, for a moment, a master craftsman shaping a piece of wood. When the wood splits, when the cut goes wrong, does the craftsman throw the wood across the room and call it worthless? No. The craftsman looks closely. The craftsman adjusts the grip, studies the grain, and begins again, patient, attentive, unshaken. This is how a master treats an imperfect result. And this is exactly how a master treats an imperfect self. You have spent years, perhaps your whole life, being both the wood and the harsh hand that strikes it. It is time to become the craftsman instead. Not someone who ignores your flaws, not someone who pretends every action was perfect, but someone who looks at failure the way a craftsman looks at a difficult piece of wood, with attention, with patience, and without cruelty. This is not weakness. This is not letting yourself off easily. In fact, speaking to yourself with mastery requires far more discipline than speaking to yourself with harshness. Harsh words are easy. They arrive automatically without thought, like an old habit running on its own. Mastery requires a pause. It requires you to catch the automatic insult before it leaves your mind and to replace it consciously with something more useful. Try this the next time you fail at something that matters to you. Instead of saying, "I always mess this up," say, "This attempt did not work. What does it teach me?" Instead of saying, "I am too weak for this," say, "I am still building the strength for this." Notice the difference. One sentence closes a door, the other keeps it open. One sentence defines you by a single moment, the other allows you to keep growing beyond it. A master speaks with precision, not exaggeration. When you fail at one task, you have failed at one task, nothing more. But the untrained inner voice loves exaggeration. It takes one failure and turns it into a life sentence. "I failed this exam" becomes "I am not smart enough." This relationship ended becomes "I am impossible to love." Do you see how far the mind travels from the actual event? A master does not allow this leap. A master stays close to the truth, and the truth is almost always smaller and kinder than the exaggerated story your mind wants to tell. This kind of speech is a skill, like any other. It will feel unfamiliar at first, even artificial. Now, that is normal. Every new skill feels awkward before it feels natural. The first time a student practices a new movement, the body resists, the mind doubts. But with repetition, what once felt forced becomes effortless. The same is true here. Speak to yourself with steadiness once, and it feels strange. Speak to yourself with steadiness 1,000 times, and it becomes who you are. And there is one more piece to this mastery. A piece so quiet that most people walk past it without noticing. It has nothing to do with control. It has nothing to do with discipline at all. 5. The discipline of self-compassion. Compassion, real compassion, is often misunderstood. People think it means being soft, being lenient, allowing themselves to avoid responsibility. This is not compassion. This is simply avoidance, wearing a gentle mask. True compassion, the kind that actually transforms a life, is far more demanding than harshness could ever be. To be compassionate with yourself means to stay present with your pain instead of running from it. It means to look directly at your failure instead of numbing yourself with distraction. It means to say clearly and honestly, "This hurt, and I am still here," without collapsing into self-pity and without hiding behind denial. This is not the easy path. This is the disciplined path. Consider how quickly most people offer comfort to others and how slowly they offer it to themselves. A friend calls upset about a mistake at work and you immediately say, "It's okay, you're human. You'll figure it out." The words arrive without effort. But when you make the same mistake, the comfort disappears, replaced by judgment. Why does the kindness flow so easily outward and so rarely inward? This is the question worth sitting with, because the answer reveals exactly where your healing must begin. Self-compassion is not about lowering your standards. It is about changing the way you hold yourself accountable. A harsh voice says, "You failed because you are lazy, weak, not enough." A compassionate voice says, "You failed. What happened? What do you need so this does not happen again?" Notice, the compassionate voice still asks for growth. It still expects more from you, but it asks with warmth instead of contempt. And warmth, as it turns out, produces far greater and more lasting change than contempt ever has. There is scientific truth in this, not only spiritual truth. People who treat themselves with harsh criticism after failure often become more afraid of trying again. Fear of punishment, even self-inflicted punishment, makes the mind cautious, small, and hesitant. But people who treat themselves with steady compassion after failure tend to try again sooner and try harder. because they are not afraid of what waits for them if they fail once more. Compassion, then, is not the opposite of ambition. Compassion is what allows ambition to survive difficulty without breaking. This discipline must be practiced daily in small moments, not only in moments of crisis. When you make a small mistake, spilling something, forgetting something, saying the wrong word in conversation, notice how you respond. This is where the practice truly lives, in these small, unremarkable moments, far more than in the large dramatic failures that arrive only occasionally. The way you speak to yourself over spilled water will, over years, shape the way you speak to yourself over a broken dream. And as this discipline deepens, as you continue choosing patience over punishment, understanding over judgment, something begins to happen in the wider shape of your life. Something that reaches far beyond the quiet moments of self-talk into every corner of how you live each day. 6. The life that follows the voice. The voice you carry does not stay contained inside your own mind. It moves outward, quietly, into everything you build. It shapes the risks you are willing to take and the ones you quietly avoid. It shapes the relationships you allow into your life and the ones you push away, believing you deserve nothing better. It shapes how you carry yourself into a room, how you respond to rejection, how you recover after loss. Nothing in your life sits outside its reach. A person who speaks to themselves with cruelty will often, without realizing it, accept cruelty from the world as well, because it feels familiar, expected, even deserved. A person who learns to speak to themselves with steadiness and respect begins to expect the same from their surroundings, and slowly the surroundings begin to shift, because people often treat us the way we have quietly taught them to, through the way we treat ourselves in front of them. This is the quiet, patient transformation that unfolds when the inner voice changes. It is rarely sudden. It rarely feels dramatic while it is happening. But one day, months or years into this practice, you notice something has shifted. You fail at something, and instead of collapsing, you steady yourself and continue. You are criticized, and instead of shrinking, you listen, consider, and decide for yourself what is true. You look in the mirror after a hard day, and instead of a list of faults, you find something closer to understanding. This is not about becoming perfect. Perfection was never the goal, and chasing it only feeds the very voice you are trying to soften. The goal is much simpler and much deeper: to become someone who can be trusted by yourself. Someone whose inner voice, even during the hardest seasons, remains steady enough to walk beside you rather than tear you down. I do not ask you to change this voice today and expect it finished tomorrow. This is not that kind of transformation. It is slow, patient work, much like water shaping stone, not through force but through gentle, continuous attention, returned to again and again, long after it stops feeling difficult. But I will tell you this with complete certainty: the moment you begin to notice the voice, question its origin, and meet the silence beneath it, you have already started the most important work a person can ever do. Speak to yourself today the way you would speak to someone you deeply love. Not once, not only when it is convenient, but as a quiet, ongoing practice. Return to every single day. Do this and watch how gently, how surely everything around you begins to change. Not because the world became softer, but because you did, and the world had simply been waiting to meet you there.